Welcome to Bat Therapy, the psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown, and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
All right.
Wolverine. Let's do this. Yes, let's talk about Logan.
Oh my gosh. So, funny story. This movie was playing when my son was born. Like, we were in the hospital like all day, and there was like a Marvel marathon on TV. And when he was born, Logan was playing. And it's funny because it's not the happiest movie, but it always makes me happy whenever I see it or think about it, because it takes me back. I'm like, oh yeah, my son was born, and that was
baby's first rated R movie.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Do you remember your first rated R movie?
Yeah, it was one of the Matrix sequels.
Oh wow. Okay, so I was quite a bit younger, and
I just never thought to go to rated R movies. I don't know which ones I've seen on TV though.
So yeah, I don't remember what my first rated R movie in the theater was. Honestly, it might have been one of the Matrix sequels, but I remember the first rated R movie I saw as a kid was The Terminator.
That's rated R?
Absolutely it is.
I don't think I ever realized that. See, I have no idea what my first rated R movie was because
The Land Before Time, right? No. But
I mean, that's pretty scary.
But that was one of that was what was so interesting about Logan. Was it was touted even when it came out. It's like, this is going to be a rated R movie. I'm like, oh man, being to tell me I get to see Wolverine just like absolutely brutalize people, and sure enough, that's what they did. But oh my gosh, like, Wolverine is always interesting because in X-Men, especially in the movies, he's just like the badass, and everyone just loves him. Like, yeah, Wolverine, he's so rugged. And in this, we still love him, but it's because we just want to like be there for him and hug him. Like, he's going through.
He's had it rough. I mean, he always had it rough.
Yeah.
But
yes,
things got worse.
Yeah, he's had it rough and eternally. Like, that's what's crazy. Like, this is someone who we watched him fight through every major war in X-Men Origins. This is someone we watched survive one of the atomic bombings in the Wolverine. Like, he's just gone through all of it, and he's also just he's only lost. Like, that's what's bad about living forever. Like, you just lose everyone eventually.
Yeah, it makes me think, what you're describing makes me think of reading, what was it? Tuck Everlasting? Is that the name of that book? Do you know what book I'm talking about?
I believe so. I think, yes.
Where it's like a family that lives forever.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're talking about. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, there are a lot of storylines where there is an eternal creature or someone who lives forever and how they handle it and deal with it. And I think he falls. There's usually some sort of wandering or loneliness that comes with that, or really connecting to your pack, so to speak, of people, because of just what that does to you. To, I mean, essentially see other humans as pets or organisms that have, like a fruit fly.
Yeah.
You'd see normal humans like a fruit fly and how long they live. But he, I feel like, is at the extreme in terms of being the wanderer and, like you said, lost. And I mean, I know this is like an alternate reality Wolverine, but no matter what, it seems like Wolverine's like, "Oh, I need to regain my memories of what's happened to me." But even beyond those kinds of storylines, when he understands himself more, he still ends up wandering and seeming like this loner who has trouble, is lost and wandering no matter what.
Absolutely. And what's even sadder is Wolverine's whole story is he doesn't have to wander anymore because he has the X-Men and he has
Yeah.
Xavier and he has a family
Mhm.
now, so to speak. And this movie, it is that family has been lost and it's barely hanging on because he has basically two people that he's really
Mhm.
uh there with, Caliban and Professor X, who is, oh my gosh, so it's so sad. He's going through, I don't know if they ever, do they ever say what?
They alluded to the fact that he probably was having some sort of, like, dementia potentially from, old it seemed like it was beyond old age, not just, "Oh, he's getting old," but something else kind of deteriorating
Yeah, it was
where
like a
his mental
degenerative.
capacities
Yeah.
were every now and then he would have trouble remembering Logan or knowing where he was and when he was. And then sometimes his powers would kind of go on the fritz. And so I think they were alluding to all of that being some sort of dementia kind of thing.
Yeah, it was definitely some form of degenerative brain disease, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking because throughout you're wondering, okay, what happened to the X-Men, and they're not really
Mm,
saying what happened, and then you find out later on that accidentally he had an episode like that, and killed all the X-Men
yeah.
by mistake, which is so heartbreaking. And throughout, he doesn't really remember. He doesn't
He
really
does later
remember it. Right,
on.
right. Um,
Yeah, he actually similar to dementia, a lot of times you have like sundowning and different things where you have periods where you're more lucid and connecting the dots, and over time you tend to lose your connection and memories depending on the dementia. You see different kind of time frames for that, but the fact that he kind of is in and out of it does make sense. But yeah, it seems like he doesn't fully realize. So once again, here's Logan. He's bearing the weight of a lot of stuff, I feel like, for Professor X.
yes. And one thing that's really interesting about that, but that it made me think about, because there's, I feel like there's a difference, but also a similarity between not actually being able to remember something and blocking something out
Oh, yeah.
purposefully.
Mhm. Yep.
Uh, and when I was watching the movie the very first time I ever saw it, I always wondered if it was the latter. Like, did he actually remember what happened and he's just kind of trying to block it out? Or did,
Mm.
but then as it went on, like, especially after I watched it multiple times, it was like, okay, no, he actually can't remember because of whatever's going on with his
Yeah.
mind.
Well, and that can be that can be hard to suss out too. So there are a number of different avenues in which a person may forget, may not remember an event that happened. It could even or not remember certain things. And dementia is one of the things that can happen. Some dissociative processes, mental health wise. Trauma can affect how you consolidate memory. Sleep can affect how much you're able to retain and consolidate memory. There's so many different things, and I mean, people can even forget who they are. They can forget huge chunks of time, and it can be tricky to know when is someone more act like you were saying, purposefully or more active in the process and trying not to remember something versus when is the brain essentially doing it for you, I guess, in a way. But I would agree with you. It seems like the dementia process, the neurodegenerative process happening here seems to be really at play. But you bring up an intriguing question though, because he has one of the most powerful minds ever
Yes.
and can manipulate a lot of things about other people's minds.
Hmm.
So it begs the question, can his mind do that to itself? And could that have been part of what degenerated for him in that in because it was such a horrible thing that he did, could he not live with it and so his brain kind of reverberated backwards?
Right. I
But in order to do that it started breaking down? That's a really intriguing question.
I don't know. Yeah, and it was one of those things where Caliban and Logan really tried to kind of do everything they could to kind of just really keep him settled, because it felt like it was one of those things where he would just have episodes when he didn't take his
Yeah.
medicine, and it almost seemed like it was like a seizure, like something that he could not
Mhm.
control. And so it was really heartbreaking to see, because I mean throughout these movies he's just this all powerful figure that's just
Yeah.
like, this guy can handle it all. He's untouchable.
Yeah.
And suddenly just seeing him in this state, and seeing Logan in this state, because Logan's gotten older, he doesn't move like he used to. He's
Mhm.
doesn't heal like he used
Yeah.
to. It's rough. It's rough to see, because even though this is an Elseworld story, it felt like it was an ending to the X-Men movies that
Mm.
we had watched. It's like, wow, all of that really ended this sadly. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
one of those, I was like, oh, this is rough. Like just seeing
Yeah.
Wolverine just driving a limousine around for drunk people. I'm like, what is happening right now? I don't like this at all.
Yeah, and I mean, it almost feels like he ended up back where he started too. So
Yes.
you mentioned how the X-Men, it's meant to be this story of being found and becoming connected. But here you have him losing all of that and he's drinking a lot of alcohol. Someone refers to him as a junkie. He he actually wants to abandon a young girl
Yeah.
and not help her.
Like, I don't need
Uh,
this.
yeah, he wants to just walk away entirely from a little girl who needs help and just go back to his own life. I mean, these are things that are very much early days Wolverine that it is sad. It's sad when you see a character play out and they didn't have the full growth that you were hoping for. But he does return to it in the end in this. He does end up helping the girl, Laura. He does end up becoming more connected again. But oh man, they always got to rip your heart out. Of course, it's like right before the end for him. So it's kind of bittersweet. But
And it's interesting because the thing about Wolverine is he's still a good guy. Like, it's not one of
mm,
those things where he's just like, I just don't care about being a good person. Like, he's still a decent guy. It's like he went back to, what's the point? Even if I
hmm
help somebody, I'm gonna outlive them. Even if I help
hmm
someone, they might end up dying anyway. I can't
hmm
protect. I feel like he feels like he can't protect the ones he loves, because he has lost
hmm
his family, and even the person that's like a brother slash father figure to him, Professor
hmm
X. He's like, there's nothing I can do for him right
they're
now.
just kind of whittling down.
Yeah,
They're essentially degrading in front of your eyes together.
yeah.
They're whittling away.
It's one of those things, you look at it, and I'm not gonna lie, as I was watching it, my first thought was just thinking about like how, when as you get older, you naturally start losing people that you grew up
Mm.
with, and friends and stuff like that. And I always used to be one of those people that was like, I want to live forever. I just want to live and
Oh,
live
I
and
never I
and
never
live.
felt that way.
And watching this, it was one of those things I thought about it. I'm like, man, I don't want to. I don't want to outlive all of my loved ones and friends. Like, I don't think that's a good. I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
fun life, and because that's what's that's what's happening with Wolverine, and plus he's clearly in a lot of pain now because he has the adamantium
Mhm.
poisoning over the
And
years.
and let's just put it out there. I mean, if you live lifetimes, God, just us everyday people must seem really irritating to you.
Right,
I mean, think about we probably we might come off as like little toddlers or something in terms of what we can understand and grasp purely based on limitations of experience you can gain over one lifetime versus however many.
right. He's pushing. If my math is right, he's pushing the 250 to 300
Mm,
range. He's
yeah,
getting somewhere around there, and so
yeah,
it's yeah, it's got to be that's got to be rough. That's got to
yeah.
be really
And
rough.
if someone tells you to look on the bright side of life, you're probably just roll your eyes. And I mean, I would grumble and be very Wolverine about it, I think, if I were
Right.
in his
Yeah, it's kind of
shoes.
like yeah, it's there was one time I'll never forget. I was going through a lot in life, and there was some random person that I just do not know just goes, just remember, God will never give you anything you can't handle. And I just kind
Mhm,
of looked at him like, what? Like you can't
mhm,
that's difficult. That's a rough thing to say to someone during loss
yeah.
or during painful things, right? Like
And
imagine someone
it's
saying that to Wolverine. Like, really?
yeah. And it's meant to be like, "Hey, I believe in you. You can get through this."
Right.
But there are certain ways of trying to be there for someone that don't always hit well. And that yeah, phrases like that, a lot of times, yeah, it almost feels like, "Oh, you just don't get it."
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And that's where Wolverine is. Wolverine is by himself on this
Yep.
planet as far as what he has been through, as far as seeing humanity and how it all goes. He's in a
Yep.
state where he's like, "Yep, these people can't be helped. They're trash. Humanity's garbage. All the mutants have been killed off. I watched this happen in the Holocaust. I watched this happen to
Mhm.
mutants. Humanity's trash. This is all garbage. I just want to get a boat and live out the rest of my days and
Yep.
say F everything, right? Uh, but he's still a decent person. And the reason I say that is because it he still has not abandoned Professor X.
Mm.
He's still doing everything he can to help him get through this pretty much this definitely this last stage of his life because I think Professor X said he's pushing 90 at this
Yeah,
point.
something like that.
And then of course the way he takes upon this task of protecting Laura
Mhm.
and helping you see him help the family with the horses in the movie, which oh my god, this is a sad movie. This
Ugh.
is such a sad
I
movie.
hated that part. I hated that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for anyone who might not remember, um, they helped this family whose horses kind of ran off on the freeway or highway or whatever. And so they help, and then the family offers to give them a meal and for them to stay the night. And Professor X convinces Wolverine to let them do this, which, by the way, um, thanks a lot, Professor X. Like, people are after you guys.
Right.
Not safe. But anyway, the family gets brutally murdered one at a time. So I would say the worst part, not having been in this situation myself, but the worst part for me is that the kid dies first. So then the mom sees that the kid dies, and then she dies, and then so the father finds out that. But it's like the there's the loss happening too. Like you just have to kind of experience it
It's an
over and over
absolute
again one at a
nightmare. It's
time.
an like, that would be my absolute
That's
nightmare.
awful.
Like, the way that that all played out, and it was so sad because it almost felt like Professor X's last,
Mm,
his I mean, essentially, it was his last
yeah.
supper. Because I mean, he even says, like, "I that was the best night of sleep that I've had,
Mhm.
and I cannot remember, not even the night of sleep, but the best night that I've
Yeah.
had." And it really felt they how they comfort people in hospice,
Mm,
or like, just make them as comfortable as possible. And what his comfortable place was being in a family environment and being in
yeah.
a home that he felt the love there. And it was a very sad send off, but it was also nice that he did get to experience that.
Yeah. I guess I'm just kinda like, "What was you getting that worth this happening to this family?" I don't
It
know.
wasn't. It was not.
Uh,
I will
I
say
think
that.
I think Wolverine, rightfully so, was cautious. He wasn't just being grumbly old Wolverine who doesn't wanna be around people. There was a good reason not to go with that family, but he has a soft spot for Professor X.
Yeah.
And I think it was just one of those and they do a good job too of the family has struggles and then Wolverine's kind of helping and so it seems like they're cut off just like randomly. Like they have a storyline going and then they get killed, which when things do that, it feels more real because that's how life tends to be. You
I
don't
think
get a
yeah,
setup for death. It
yeah.
just happens.
A-
And so those can feel the most brutal, I think, in a lot of shows and movies.
And I think that's why they did that also, because Wolverine's already in this state where it's like, it doesn't matter what I do, everything ends bad. And
And then
he
everything
got
ends bad.
and he got hit with that again. And
You know,
yeah,
as a therapist, it's very hard to sit with people with that because, um, so okay, in therapy, we like to think, oh, we go for treatment for something and it gets fixed. This thing gets better, and it'd be great if that's how things worked, but sometimes that's not. Sometimes there are things where it's like, oh, okay, we can teach you skills and help you quote unquote fix or improve on things and whatnot. Sometimes, though, it's a bunch of shit has happened and a lot of terrible things, and a person is just trying to find a way to be okay with the fact that it's all happened. And I would say for me, one of the hardest things about being a therapist is when there's not something. I was going to say there's not something you can offer, but that's not true. When the thing you can offer isn't here's something to move you past it. The thing that I can offer is the space to sit with just whatever it is and giving that person the opportunity to just kind of pause in a space and a place with someone else and just acknowledge how awful things have been.
yeah.
That can be really tough.
And it's got to be interesting, as because when you think about going to a doctor, you're thinking about healing. But with therapy, sometimes I feel like it's difficult to know the finish line, right?
Mm,
Like, if you
yeah,
dealt with a traumatic experience, I know in your mind it's like, "Oh, I'm going to therapy." But it's not one of those things like, "I'm going to therapy and one day I won't hurt anymore." Right? Like, it's like, no, you lost someone, and
yeah,
you'll always
yeah.
essentially be sad about it. Uh
But, I think that there's this natural hope, not for everyone that goes to therapy, but for a number of people, there's this understandable hope there that maybe this can be made to go away or that I won't hurt anymore, whatever it might be. And it's tricky because sometimes, if there are symptoms that are happening for a person, we can help where they do go away. Other times they get less intense or less frequent. But yeah, you're very much right in that therapy it doesn't change the past. It doesn't change what has happened. A lot of times it can't entirely change what's currently happening. It can't always change how things are going to be in the future, just
Right.
depending on what the scenario is. But it definitely cannot change the past. What it can do is help with being able to move through it in the way that just makes it as feasible for a person as possible. How to be able to, I guess, move into the future in the best way possible, given what has happened,
Yeah.
given what we can and cannot change. What's the best path forward? But it is tough because sometimes people come in and they're Logans,
Yeah.
and so many terrible, terrible things have happened. They've had their unfair share, and it feels really crappy, uh, because I can't change any of that stuff, and so, um, you almost feel like you can't offer enough to a person, but there's something in acknowledging you've had an unfair amount of stuff happen to you,
Right. Especially a
and someone
third
just
party.
acknowledging that. Yes.
Especially a third party. Because so many times something bad will happen and it's like somebody will call and say, "Hey, praying for you. Hey, thinking about you. Hey, let me know anything that you need." And in my mind it's like I'm thankful for that, but also this is a friend
Mm,
saying this, and that is the role of a friend,
mhm.
right? To be there for someone and you can lean on them and tell them things and they're like, "Yeah, man, that's so rough." But hearing from a third party, like they get your story and they say, "Okay, this
Mm.
is rough. This sucks." There is something about that that's like, "Okay, I have it," and it's horrible to say, "I have a right
Yeah.
to feel this way." But I do
Isn't
like
that weird how
yeah,
that can happen? Where yeah, it's I totally agree with what you're coming where you're coming from, and I think it's why some ways that people try and be there for each other can hit in the wrong way, because yeah, it can feel like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or I shouldn't pause in the hurt, or um it can just kind of, yeah, it can feel like, oh, I'm supposed to move past this now. I'm not allowed to just be in the moment. And a lot of therapy can be pausing someone and saying, okay,
and
we're trying to move past this thing, but hold on, first, let's just acknowledge that this sucks.
yeah. And the thing that's interesting too is when it comes to that acknowledgement, it really does have to do with the people that are around you too. Like I
Mm,
remember like as I remember as a kid playing baseball and like I had a coach really early on. It was like boys aren't supposed to cry, right? And of course all those guys around are like, "Yeah, boys don't cry," right? And
it's like
so
boys have tear ducts too, people.
right. But it made me think about that too, right, when you said that, because when we think about Logan, the people he ran with the most before before the X-Men was the Weapon X program
Mm,
with
mhm.
William Stryker, and they were just going around committing war crimes
Yep.
and doing all kinds of atrocious things and not and just moving forward, just
Mhm.
bulldozing ahead and not even
Yep.
taking range of the emotions and like, okay, I do understand how you feel. This is something horrible that you just went through. I get it. And so yeah, it is really interesting because honestly, I really look at it goes back to the Professor X episode, like what is he exactly? And to
Mm,
Wolverine, I definitely feel like Professor X was very much a therapist for
Mm,
him.
yeah. Yeah, and he also kinda took on a fatherly you were mentioning it earlier, I think kind of a fatherly piece too, which, I it depending on kind of the relationship you have with a therapist, there can kind of be, like, what kind of other relationships might it connect with in some way? Like, some people I remember hearing someone the other day who's a different kind of provider, but I feel like people want different things, and some people might want a more parental kind of figure. Others might want someone who kind of tests them or keeps them on their toes, or different people are going to want different things from their therapists. And yeah, you're right, they're definitely, and even in this you get this sense of Professor X trying to help Wolverine be psychologically healthy where he can.
Hmm.
But yeah, it is really tough. And I think part of this stuff too is when a lot of okay, so we as humans, for the most part, like to think that life is predictable and that life makes sense. But I mean, there's cause and effects, and we can predict different things, and if you strike a match on something, a flame will appear. Like there's predictability in life, but there's also chaos and things that we can't understand, and the way I kind of go about it is saying, we will never know everything,
Right.
and we'll never be able to understand everything. The more you understand things, the more questions you end up having as well. But the thing is because it can be overwhelming to think of life as being unpredictable, we like to think of life making sense and being logical. And what's the logic behind someone where a bunch of bad stuff seems to always happen?
Right.
We can also just naturally start thinking, okay, I, I I can't handle seeing life as too chaotic. And therefore, how do I explain all of this bad stuff happening to me? And it can get really internalized. Some people get really angry at the outside world and saying everyone's out to get me. And then other people might internalize it and say there's something wrong with me. And that's why all this stuff's happening. And I think that's another reason why a therapist or a third party, like you were talking about, can be helpful. Or in Logan's case, having Professor X, where you have these reminders where it's like, you know what? Sometimes a lot of bad stuff happening to you is because you've been really unlucky and we don't know why, but it's unfair.
Yeah. Yeah, and you do bring up a good point because yeah, it's like it's one of those things like enough bad stuff happens to you and you're like, okay, is it me? Is it the world? And then a third
Mhm.
aspect too, of course, is when it comes to religion, it's like, okay, is there a higher power that just does not
Sure.
like me, right?
Yeah,
Uh
that can totally and for some people when bad things happen, religion is helpful to them. And then there are other people when bad things happen, religion is harmful to them.
yes. Yes. Very yes, very much so. I completely I definitely uh agree with that. And that's something that I feel like doesn't really it gets it gets touched on a little bit in X-Men, but not much. Like Nightcrawler was very, very religious and it
Mm,
helped him get through a lot of
yeah.
the bad things he was going through. But I think that wasn't something that Wolverine could really he ever really had a chance to really
Yeah.
rely on much just because he sees the world in a very, very different picture,
Mhm.
right?
And so integrating religion into therapy is actually beneficial to people who are religious or have any sort of spiritual or faith-based beliefs, integrating that stuff in. However, yeah, you also have to fit it with the person, and Wolverine exactly is very different from Nightcrawler in terms of how beneficial or harmful it might be if you approach it in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so matching that to the person is definitely important. And You were saying with therapy, and I think Professor X tries to kind of hold this line, and some of our friends and family might be able to hold this better than others, but some people are there to try and be, as much as possible, a less biased perspective. And so for some people, they're going to approach you through their own belief system more, while other people will try and approach you from your belief system more. And neither one is necessarily right or wrong. It's just that in certain circumstances, if someone isn't fully aware of what you believe, they might mismatch.
Right.
And if they're approaching you from their own perspective, the wording might not come across in the best way because they're talking to you how they would want to hear something, not how you would want to hear something.
Yeah. And yeah, so Wolverine has been through all of this, and then near the end, he finds out he has a genetically a daughter, right?
Yep.
Because he didn't really have a part in her creation besides his DNA being used without his permission, but she is genetically his his daughter, and I think he does feel some natural responsibility, but on top of that, I think he was also very much pushed by Charles uh
Mm,
to do it. I feel like Charles was definitely had like strongly pushing him towards accepting this, not
yeah.
necessarily fatherly role, but definitely a protective role
Yeah.
for her, because Wolverine was just like, I'm gonna walk away. This is crazy. I
Yep.
cannot. I'm he pulled a Murtaugh. I'm too old for this, right? Uh but even then, and it the transition in the movie was really, really fast, but he did come around, and it was one of those things where I looked at it as, like I said, I don't think there was ever a moment where Wolverine stopped being a good person. I
Mm,
think he was just very reluctant to try and be the good guy after losing so many times.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? So putting your heart on the line.
Yes. What? Yes.
And yeah, and I think you're right that Professor X, I mean, once again, they also have more of a personal relationship, so it's not truly a therapist. Um, but he definitely is trying to help Logan be able to open his heart again and be able to essentially say, okay, bad things happen, and how do I still live life
Right.
despite the fact that bad things happen? So, one of the things that I found interesting about this, and I don't honestly know too much about this kind of area, but I found Laura really interesting from a psychological perspective because she almost never speaks.
Right.
And so I was nerdily, as I was preparing for this, nerdily researching as the movie was going, and I was like, okay, so is this selective mutism? I think it's selective mutism that's going on. Um, there at first it's unclear if she's able to speak, and so
Yes.
that would be something different. So there's brain disorders where communication is impacted, where a person's brain and the motor development essentially for being able to communicate, something kind of messing up in that process. Versus selective mutism is you have the ability to speak, but there are certain situations where you do not speak. And so what I was reading up on is a lot of it has to do with high anxiety. So things where you might think of, sometimes people have difficulty coming up with something to say, their mind might go blank or whatnot. Just kind of think of an extreme version in a lot of ways where she can speak if she's in a comfortable place. And so there was kind of that question mark. It was really interesting to see it play out because um she was able to talk to Professor X because, he's got his all mind power. So I
Right.
was like, okay, well, that might mean that there's a motor issue. But then later she speaks to Logan. He's like, you could talk this whole time? She's like, yeah.
And and it's what I found interesting with that was from the moment she was born, she hasn't been able to trust the people around her. Like,
Except for the other kids.
except for the other kids. Like, from the moment that she came into the earth, on
Hmm.
like, she just has not been able to trust the adults
Yeah.
around her. And so I think even being around adults puts her in a high stress situation,
Hmm.
very high anxiety, because if we're thinking about like the snippets of the movie where we saw in the facility that she was in before, it's like, oh my
Yeah.
god, adults are villains. Adults are the
Hmm.
are and it's not one of those things where she could differentiate. Finally she was able to differentiate between the nurse and the rest of them.
Hmm.
But outside of that, it had to be someone like Professor X who could
Yeah.
mentally sync
And
up
it
with her.
probably it probably helped that he also generally would be very different. I find it highly unlikely that someone of his age was working in the facility just because normally if you're like, what was he, 85, 90 or whatnot,
Hmm.
you're probably not still working in like a research facility like that. So I bet the age probably helped. Um, it, obviously his abilities, those helped as well.
Yes.
But you're totally right. And even with the nurse, okay, great, the nurse saved her. How many years was that nurse just
Right.
kind of not saving her?
Yeah. Like, yeah.
So,
How long did it take her to snap out of it and be like, oh, this isn't okay at
oh, now
all?
that we're going to kill the children, now I have an
Right.
ethical issue with it.
Right.
And so Laura probably grew up thinking at worst, at best, peop adults do a lot of bad things to us, and don't really help when they could. And at worst, they are doing experiments on you and will try and get rid of you if you're no longer useful.
Which is so horrible, but it also brings up how the way that we are raised really sets up our view of the world and how things
Mm,
are. Because with her, she grew up in a world where the adults, all of the adults, you could not trust them and they were
mhm.
villains. And now she has to go out into the rest of the world.
And there are a lot of adults out there.
Right, and deal with that, and that's heavy, and it's one of those things, like, I remember, like, even with me, I grew up, and as a child, I was not around nice dogs. I had a lot of
Mm.
horrible experience with dogs, and even now in my 30s, I'll see a dog, and my first reaction isn't, "Oh, it's a dog." It's like, "Oh, okay. Is it one of the good ones? Like, I don't know. Like, I,
Mhm.
but it's because that's the environment that I grew
Yep.
up in. I grew up in an environment where I did not have good experiences with
Mhm.
dogs. And so and that's a very, very small scale, of course, compared to what Laura went through in the
Mhm.
movie. But it is interesting how being having a compartmentalized world that we grow up in can really
Yeah.
affect how we view the rest of the world when we get there.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there are many people a lot of times it comes up in childhood trauma stuff, and I know we've talked about this in earlier seasons, but I can't think of episodes, but it comes up a lot with trauma, but just generally, um, the the older you get, kind of the less egocentric you get, and you start realizing more and more not everything is the same as your own experience. Not everyone else is the same as you. And a lot of times people will talk about these really traumatic scenarios and they say, I did not know that this was wrong until I was around a different environment. I went to college, or I met new
Right.
people, or I got away somehow. I met people who had, like you were saying, grew up in different contexts than myself. But yeah, and it's true for other things as well. I mean, my husband and I, every now and then there's something where like, we're interacting with his family and I'm like, oh, this is different than how my family does this. I didn't even think of that as being something that was different based on, what family you were in. And there's a lot of similarities between our families. So with a lot of different scenarios, absolutely we perceive things in certain ways because of the experiences we have, how we grew up, but we also make automatic assumptions because our brains essentially fill in the blanks. And we also just generally we can't take in all information all of the time. So our brains are trying to kind of simplify things for us and help us predict kind of what's going to happen in different scenarios. But yeah, we're all going to have a little bit of bias there based on how we grew up. So
Yeah, and it took
unfortunately for Laura, whew.
yeah, and it took a while, but I think her brain did connect the dots. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
he has saved me now several different times.
Yep.
I've watched him kill for me. I've watched
Mm-hmm.
him uh, do things that he wasn't really comfortable with for me. And so this is someone that I can trust.
Yeah.
And he has the same abilities as me. Like thinking you're
That probably
unique in the
helps. Yep.
world and then seeing someone who has the exact same abilities as you, that had to go
Yep.
a long way as well.
And I think connected to that, same abilities and also kind of assorted backgrounds. So
Yes, that
I was
rage
just
was
thinking,
there.
yeah. I mean, you see this girl and she's raging against everybody. She'll kill you
Right.
without thinking
Love
about it.
love
I
her.
mean, I mean, she's not going to just kill you for no reason, but you do anything wrong and that girl will kill you.
Yeah.
And so the family that dies in it, and she does, obviously she's intrigued by the family. She seems to be able to recognize that they're good people.
Mhm.
It's a safe place. But I'm not sure she would have opened up to them at the same pace per se,
I don't think so.
because the similarities, not just in the physical similarities help, okay, we both got the claws and we're the whole Wolverine thing, but also he's rough around the edges. He knows what it's like to kill people too. He knows and distrusts he sees things about the world that she sees. All of that stuff can be really helpful when it's
Yes.
like, okay, this is a person that gets me or could get me, if I did start talking. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that they kind of made it seem like she was purposely not talking the whole time. With
Yes.
selective mutism, I know it says selective, which makes it sound purposeful, but the anxiety is kind of making the choice for you. It's usually not like a I'm not talking. It's a I can't talk. And so that part's a little less clear for her, but yeah, I think she's gonna be more comfortable around Logan and get to that point of talking much faster than, say, that family where she probably would think that they're wonderful, but how do I relate to them?
Yeah, and I also think it helped her open up to him too, seeing him and being around him when he's in such a vulnerable state, when he's not
Mm,
able to heal and he is
yeah,
sick and he isn't 100%, and being around him when she's not afraid of him,
yeah,
I think also kind of helped open
yeah,
things up too, because I can completely understand, like, learning to not be afraid of someone or be comfortable around them when the threat that you see is
mhm,
taken away. It's kind of like
yeah,
if you see someone with a gun on their hip, and it might be one of those things that makes you instantly nervous. And then if they take it off or put it away, suddenly you're a lot more comfortable than you might have been
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Another thing that probably made him less threatening that we don't always think about, we sometimes actually make it harder for someone who's anxious to feel comfortable by trying to help them. Because I was reading up on selective mutism because I don't really know that much about it. And one of the things it was suggesting, now you can have it as an adult, but a lot of times you see it with children. And one of the things I was reading was, I think, like a child website. So they were talking about what parents can do. And it was talking about not focusing so much on them talking and making sure that they know it's okay not to talk right now. You'll talk when you're comfortable, when you're ready. Maybe finding other ways to communicate to relieve the pressure. Where a lot of times we think, oh, let's encourage this person, encourage them to do this thing. Hey, it's okay. This is a comfortable place. Da, da. But that adds pressure. And a lot of times it can kind of pull for embarrassment or feeling self-conscious. And I mean, who better than Logan? Because I mean, Logan doesn't care. He's like, he's not going to force her to talk. He's kind of this gruff guy that's like, whatever, people are going to do what they're going to do.
Right.
And that's actually, in some ways, can be a much better approach than someone who really wants to draw that person out and help them. Sometimes we can want to help too much. So Logan's approach of like kind of the gruffer approach might have actually been more helpful.
Yeah. And we also can't forget that there was definitely a language barrier
Oh
there.
yeah.
A
Yeah, yeah.
language barrier there too. Um so yeah, there was definitely I think that'll make you be quiet around someone too when you're kind of like I
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Like so I've not lived somewhere where it wasn't a language I could speak, but I've studied abroad before for chunks of time. And even if you kind of know the language, but you're not very secure in it, absolutely that's going to play a role. So that's a really, really good point
Yeah.
about the language barrier since she was speaking Spanish and he was speaking English.
Um so do we have a mindful nerd moment? And I was laughing because I've gotten to the point now where whenever when I see the subject coming up, I kind of try and guess what the mindful nerd moment is gonna be. Uh and so yeah, what is our mindful nerd moment?
Oh, I feel so much pressure now
No,
because
don't
because
don't
what
do
if I
not feel pressure.
disappoint?
No, it's
All right.
never been disappointing. It's just gotten to that point where I'm like, what are moments here that in the like I've learned
I
to
do kind
start
of love
pinpointing.
that you're okay, okay. Actually, I take it back. I mean, I still do feel a little like, "Oh, no, what if I don't come up with something as good as what he's thinking of?" But actually, I'm super stoked. That means that you're looking for opportunities for mindfulness.
Yeah.
That's
And I
awesome.
can tell you the ones that I thought about after, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll do it and then we'll see what other stuff you saw that stood out to you.
Okay.
So, what I was thinking we could do is Wolverine unsheathing his claws.
Okay.
So, kind of the I can't do a good metal coming out of your knuckles
The
sound,
the
but
the one they always use in the comics is snicked. It's like SNICKT. That's always the sound. That
snicked.
is like the sound that they use for Wolverine's claws coming out. Snicked. Snicked. Like it's I don't know. It's
Snicked. Yeah. I don't know. I wish I could make the noise, but so yeah, I was thinking what we could do, and we'll walk it through with Wolverine slash Logan. But obviously, if you or anyone listening would prefer to be Laura, or X-23 is her experiment name. Obviously, you can do her as well since she also has claws. Um, so yeah, I figured we would Wolverine it up a bit. Okay, so as we always do, sit comfortably, but try and, make sure that you're sitting straight. Um, if you're comfortable with it, closing your eyes. Otherwise, just, you know, not focusing on anything in particular in the room. And first, focusing on your breath just to help you really hone in on the mindful nerd moment. So, first, just breathing as yourself, paying attention to what it's like to inhale and exhale, noticing it throughout your body. And when you're ready, I want you to shift to imagining yourself as breathing as Wolverine. So, breathing in and out. As Wolverine, you might notice some chronic pain, as we were talking about, or some tightness. Might be a few bullet holes that are still kind of feeling a little raw. So as you're breathing in and out, just maybe noticing what your body's feeling like, what it feels like to be in the skin of Wolverine. And as best you can, try not to judge it. It's not a good or a bad feeling. It's not an I like this or I don't like this. It's an observation. I'm noticing this joint is aching. I'm noticing this burning feeling in uh, where I was cut by someone. I'm noticing the strength of my muscles. I'm noticing just the warmth and the heat of my blood pumping. And I want you to imagine that you are preparing to unsheath your claws. And first, just paying attention to what it feels like to prepare. Notice how it changes the tension in your body, how it might change your heart rate, how you might shift your body, how you're standing, how you're moving to prepare yourself. And when you're ready, I want you to slowly unsheath your claws, noticing that first moment when they start to shift forward, noticing the feeling of those claws coming out of your knuckles and the skin surrounding, and noticing that slow, steady feeling as the adamantium continues to slowly come out of your skin, and just feeling that movement until finally your claws are fully extended. And just notice that feeling for a moment. Maybe even taking your claws, scraping them against each other, noticing that metallic sound, noticing the pressure you feel as the claws hit one another. And next, steady yourself into your fighting pose because you're about to get into some trouble. All right, so we're going to shift from Wolverine back into ourselves. When you're ready for it, put those claws away. We don't need them anymore. Um, Focus back on your breath as Wolverine. And when you're ready, start shifting back to yourself. Move around a little bit. Get used to your own body again, where you are listening to this podcast. You might feel some of those sensations from Wolverine still, but kind of shifting back into you and what you're doing here. So some of us might feel a little weaker now that we're not Wolverine anymore. But hopefully we are feeling some other things as well. Maybe a little bit less pain, a few less bullet holes is nice. All right. So how was that for you?
It was cool. One thing that is was interesting about this one is the way you broke down something that actually happens incredibly fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like an action that takes maybe a second or two. but
If that.
if
Yeah.
right, if that, but you're breaking it down and slowing it way down into something
Mhm.
that you can focus on. I thought that was really cool because I never really thought of, because I know in the past we've done things like putting the costume on, and as you're talking about, it's
Mhm.
like actually that's how long it would actually take,
Mm.
or if you're like driving or doing something like that. But with this, it was like, okay, think about that moment right there, and
Yeah.
then spread that out and be mindful of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and both can work. It's not that one is better than the other, but yeah, we can hone into what is happening, or we can take something and, where possible, slow it down
Hmm.
so that you can really delve into it more. I actually, those are my favorite moments.
Yeah.
Slowing down my walk so I can feel the crunch of leaves under my feet, or um taking taking a sip of coffee or tea and letting it last for a minute versus 2 seconds.
Right.
I actually really enjoy the slow down moments a lot.
Yeah. But the mindful moments that I thought about in the movie, the
Yes.
my favorite one that I laughed at was Laura riding the mechanical horse outside of the
Yeah.
gas station. I thought about that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. I also thought about like Wolverine putting bandages on himself, because that's something he
Yes.
had to like learn to do, right? Because before he
Mhm.
just healed, but then as he got older, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I need to actually figure out how to treat some of these
Mhm.
wounds that are healing slowly. And then of course driving. I love driving, and so when they're like driving across country together, I thought about
Mhm.
that one. But those were the one.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that what I love most about what you're talking about is therapy is all about helping you become your own therapist, essentially, helping a person build up their own skill sets and ability to manage whatever it is, or to move through whatever someone's coming in for. And so I love this because you're essentially, you don't need me. You now don't need me to be able to figure out, "Hey, these might be good moments to hone in on for mindfulness." And that's a really good it's a really good sign in terms of you building that skill set for yourself.
Sweet. Telling my therapist tomorrow. Don't need therapy
There you go.
anymore.
Grade A. A
Grade
plus.
A plus 4.0. Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. Find me on social media at Crafting the Mind.
And I'm comic enthusiast and professional nerd Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. See you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.